Welcome everybody to another episode of Saving the World Together, Saving the World podcast with Luke Macmichael and Martin Rezny. Today we have a very interesting topic. We're going to be talking about the Apple TV series For All Mankind and the interesting concepts and ideas that it gets out there and can lead us towards coming up with ideas on how we could build a world for all mankind. And potentially use those ideas to bring us together to save the world. So, Martin, I'll let you jump in here. What's your take on this series in general, and what can we learn from it?
Well, I generally really like alternate histories, and I think this is a genre that hasn't been done super a lot yet, not even like in games or which are more suited to it than even TV shows, I think are. I think my first experience with the concept was in some strategy game where you were supposed to play like history, like civilization, but then you could like, I don't know, win the world domination with like some sort of Native American tribe or something, and did all of the things in wrong historical order type stuff. So always liked it. I especially liked another show, The Man in the High Castle, based on a novel by Philip K. Dick, which was about the Nazis, like what if Nazis won the Second World War, and like where would it lead after that type stuff. So always loved the genre. I think this particular show is like a really, really great example of it because like they've put so much effort into the details so that everything like looks right and sounds right, and actually to the extent to which it is based on history it is, I think, pretty well researched. And I was wondering like where they could even go after the initial concept or initial event of like what if Russians were first on the moon type stuff. So that whole thing was pretty self-contained. So I wasn't even sure like where they want to go after that. But as like somebody who studied political science, I was very pleasantly surprised, especially now in like the third season, the direction with which they're sort of mirroring real world political important milestones that still kind of happen in that world, but differently, because the assumption, I guess, is that like with uh, like homosexuality, how is it viewed, and some sort of legal constraints, and for instance, like homosexual people in the military type stuff, which is in the third season addressed when what they did is like they sort of changed the president. That is like not Bill Clinton, but is one of the female astronauts from the show, actually. So like who's secret, like spoilers, I guess, secretly homosexual, but it's made very clear very early. And sort of hiding it type stuff. So it's like they've sort of created, I think, like really interesting, like fake alternate characters and situations, but which are still following like the important stuff that was happening in the historical timeline. So it's not left by the wayside, and that's like just like the political social stuff, which they wouldn't even necessarily, I guess, have to focus on a lot because the main concept or conceit of the show is that it's the space stuff. It's like doing all the space things that everybody at NASA really wanted us to be doing at that particular point in time. But in how like sort of optimistically or like how positively generally space exploration is portrayed in the show, I think it's also interesting from the political standpoint that they are not making it as like everything's definitely 100% better type stuff, because you still have because like it didn't fail utterly, so you still have Soviet Union around, and that whole thing is like immediately questionable of like maybe this history could be argued to be better from some points of view. And I quite like that the show isn't 100% answering it, like 100% explaining like that something's definitely better or definitely worse. I think other than like it would be really nice if we were doing more stuff in space. I think that is clearly the message of the show, but it's not really painting it as like a simple solution to all of the world's problems or anything, and that there's still the problems exist, and even like some of the problems that you can argue are quite unrelated to space, are very social, are still tracking on the timeline just as they did in our timeline, which I guess like also like, but what else could they do? Like if they departed more, I guess, from the sort of social and political events, then it would seem preposterous. I guess it would like they get into a fantasy territory. So I guess it's still the most like realistic thing they could have done that people will accept as like, yeah, that's plausible type stuff. It's like kind of like it was actually, but some with some twists and turns. And I especially liked how they uh, introduced the corporate element in the third season. Sort of just like they can actually make a, because that was something I wasn't sure they could do, actually make a commentary on the present, but like while setting it in the past type stuff, and by accelerating the timeline, they could just take the stuff that's actually happening now and just put it earlier in and like wedge it into the space race between the nations. So like I was, of course, like nobody's arguing that what they're doing in the space is like not realistic or not good. But I'm like, especially like my main, I guess, review is I especially like that they're really doing well the political side of the whole issue, which for me is actually even more interesting. Like in terms of like the space program's nice, but the space program's implications on politics and society, I think to me is the most interesting and like thought-provoking part or philosophical part of the show. So I'm just thoroughly enjoying it, and I'm also not sure where exactly they're going with the whole thing,
Yeah.
either in space or in the politics, and that's also good. Just good writing.
Thank you so much. That's a really great kind of synopsis of the whole first 3 seasons. Um, and I'm really grateful you recommended it. I really didn't hear about it much before you recommended it to me a few months ago, and it's definitely been a great thing for pondering. What could the world be like? What I really thought was interesting, and the most interesting thing to me is how the competition of the Cold War and the space race in particular, because Russia won it, the U.S. basically put all in to the space race to win the next war, putting a base on the moon, and then of course getting to Mars later on. And fusion power was another big thing that came out of being able to get the helium from the moon, and figuring out how to power a moon base basically required them to create new forms of energy. So the race towards fusion happened much faster, whereas today it just keeps on getting delayed because there's no forced need for it. The powers that be kind of like things as they are. They don't need to force a race to new energies. So I thought that was very interesting in the way that it's kind of sad that we require war to progress. And World War II brought us so much things as far as increased jets, increased rockets, increased space race. And then
I would just do that. I would just say that it is already better than war. Like a Cold War is actually better than hot war. So I would still like, even as it is portrayed in the show, it is portrayed as like not ideal, but like a kind of a step up, at least from like you could actually be doing worse, meaning you could be doing nothing in space, and or you could be doing worse in that there could be an open conflict.
That's a
And
great point.
on no level is it. I actually the show is sort of showing how inevitably it is sort of bringing the competing powers closer to each
Yeah,
other.
I like that. Yeah, absolutely. So I can kind of see that, applying today as we are kind of on the brink potentially of World War III, and kind of taking that lesson. I think that's why this show is kind of so important for our world today, and for everybody, for all the Russians, for all the Americans, that kind of just think this through a little bit. And what do we really want to be the result of this potentially Cold War in Ukraine that's turned hot? But maybe at some point we could turn off the heat a little bit and make some kind of deal and turn it into another space race, or another race for saving the world.
That's like definitely races, as in like sports competitions, are definitely like civilizational advancement from the need to be like sort of proving to yourself that your nation is the best by killing other people. It's a valve, like release valve for like this more primitive tendencies. That's definitely a step up. It's just, if there's one thing that I think I would sort of criticize about the show, it's not 100% a problem, but I think they could have made the Russians more sympathetic. Like they, like for a long time we don't see their point of view, and they don't really have redeemable characters or motivations. And I think like definitely the commentary is that the government is not great. So like whatever the government is doing is usually backfiring and is bad. And I don't think it's even like super unrealistic, because of course, as a Russian person, you could say like they're making the Americans look better and make better decisions and win and stuff. But something like that, they like keep pushing themselves too much to win at all costs type stuff is definitely the mentality of the regime that it would have, and also the sort of bit of carelessness that led to something like Chernobyl. So I think like that's sort of they didn't have the Chernobyl, but like they're still the same. So I think they're trying to depict the regime has the same mentality that can lead to disasters that were preventable.
Yeah.
But like eventually they did get in a couple of redeemable characters, that like there's like the sort of the love story between the leaders of the space programs type thing. I think is a very nice thing. And then there's a defector, which is again is sort of and how I think now they will be addressing how the Russians will be treating the defector. I think that's still sort of will be resolved in future episodes actually,
Yeah.
when they were forced to meet again. So there's a couple, but we don't really see. I think the maybe the Soviet Union is a bit too villainized still in on the show in terms of like sending the message of like the actual point is that we are all the same people and actually shouldn't end up cooperating type stuff.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that I think that's the key takeaway here is maybe in showing them as the villain and then kind of turning it around at some point in the show. Because I think that's how we all kind of see Russia today with the war in Ukraine is we see them as the villains, they're the aggressor. I mean, at least it's the one guy at the top. We don't really blame the people. I don't think most of us blame the people, especially anyone who knows a Russian personally. I think I know many Russians. They're all great guys, great people. Dated one in high school that still to this day I have fond memories of. So it's it's interesting, and I'm very, very fond of the culture, fond of the people, but at the same time, the world is kind of turning against them. And how could a show like this kind of move us past that a little bit and move us beyond this divisive rhetoric towards something that could potentially lead us to a better world, lead us to a world for all mankind?
Because I think like one of the like actually biggest tragedies lately is specifically that the Russians are backing out of like International Space Station and out of that cooperation between like astronauts, which to some extent was actually like, specifically like astronauts and cosmonauts between each other. I think what sort of overplayed on the show is like the hostility. Because I think like if there's like shows of mutual hostility between them type stuff. Because I think like those particular people, like in terms of like whatever you think about the regime and stuff, even though they of course have to like say all the right things so that they could get into the position to be able to fly into space in the first place and type stuff, that was like sort of a common in sort of the Eastern Bloc, that you sort of had to have like a public persona that had to be carefully managed type stuff. I think that like you wouldn't really see that, especially if they're actually in space and they're actually in trouble. I think like that sort of all of those astronauts and cosmonauts would just cooperate without a problem while in space specifically. Like there wouldn't be like sort of a snide derision or like almost aggression or those types of things. I don't think are realistic, but that's a general problem in the portrayal of astronauts and cosmonauts, is that they're always portrayed as much more emotional and lacking self-control than they could possibly be and have that job. Because it's actually the mission to the moon almost, if you listen to the recordings of how they talk and stuff, it's actually almost like boring
It really is.
because of they're so just fine emotionally and
you can
there's no
trust them.
problem.
Yeah, you have to be able to trust these people. You can't have emotionally wild people going to space. No, I agree. I think that's the drama of it, right? Trying to dramatize this and make it interesting. Again, similar to what we talked about. How do you make something boring interesting when it's important to society and it's important to saving the world? How do we make saving the world an interesting, fun, dramatic topic?
Because it's sort of an interesting, funny thing that those people are so good at their jobs that they make the most extraordinary things appear boring, because like that's how like safely and carefully and completely according to plan they're doing them.
Yeah, and if it doesn't go to according to plan, they don't come home typically, right?
I think, but yeah, exactly. Or actually, that the only interesting scenario would be something like Apollo 13. So I think that's like legitimate. Like if you want to like look for drama, that's like as dramatic as you can possibly get, because that's when everything goes wrong. And the funny thing is, it was still overplayed, like their emotional responses and type stuff, because they were still much cooler during that situation, which was the worst case scenario, than that they were portrayed in the movie.
That's probably one of the more accurate movies, anyway, as far as true stories based on true stories, space races. But you're right, though.
Yeah, and I feel like Apollo 13 is probably the most accurate historical movie about a space program.
Yeah, interesting. Very cool, very cool. So I think circling back, it's we had a few spoilers already, but I don't want to talk too much on the details, but I definitely recommend it as a really good, entertaining, philosophical way of viewing the world. and trying to figure out what the world we want. Obviously we can look at this show and get the problems, get the divisions, that are similar to our world today, and with the war in Ukraine going on. There's so many parallels. And if we can just kind of step back from all of this and look at it from a third party perspective and try to look at our own world the exact same way you might look at this movie, and take a step back, like you're just watching our real world in a movie maybe, or in a series, and trying to pick out what you'd like to see change. If you were the director of our world series, of our world drama, how would you build it? How would you make it entertaining? And how would you kind of inspire people to create that world, that better world, whatever it is you have in mind? So
Yeah, I think it's not an accident that they specifically decided to focus on like the issue of basically rights of homosexuals. I think that was very specifically because it was legitimately a thing that was a big deal back then. Because I think they named it something else, because that's a kind of thing that I like about alternate histories. With the people do their research, I'm pretty sure they've just chosen a name that it could have been but wasn't type stuff. They said the uniform first type thing. I'm pretty
Right.
sure there must be somebody who wanted to call it that, but it just didn't catch on. Because of course the whole policy was known in our reality as "don't ask, don't tell."
Yeah, exactly.
So it was like they sort of zoomed on that, because that's also a way to reference the present, because it's a problem again. That stuff. It's like, so sort of wasn't for a bit, and now it again is a problem. So they can be doing show about a historical period that was a long time ago. So that's why I'm pretty sure there must be. I actually haven't watched too many like hateful, bad reviews of this, but I'm pretty sure some people will be just hating it on the basis of like a wokeism or whatever. That's just like, I would just wanted to be watching us going to space. I didn't care about all that homosexual bullshit and that. Didn't need to be told the message or whatever, even though that was a big deal at the time. So if you want to reference something of the time that's a big political thing, and one of your characters is the president, then you probably it would always make sense to pick that, because like what else could you even pick from the issues of the day back then that you could connect between like the politics of it and the astronauts in space?
I'm definitely extremely interested to see where it goes, how far they can take it. They're at Mars now, whether they'll build bases on Mars and go off further in the solar system, or some kind of
next season they discovered the Stargate in Giza, and then
I would doubt it, but maybe, you never know.
No, because I think that they would have to do a thing that actually it's a bit of a pet peeve of mine. So I may launch now into a bit of a what do you call it? A bit of a rant. Because there's an issue, is that like one thing that doesn't, it's the most important period of time where you should be depicting us, like if you're doing a futuristic science fiction vision of the like us like advancing toward like conquering space or whatever, is the period of time where it is us who actually develops the key technologies to actually start flying into space. Usually, if we, in the story of that universe, if we did it, they skip after. There's like, and now we've had those like I don't know, warp travel for a while, and there's a federation or whatever, and that's the starting point. So they skip over this interesting, important, I think, part that needs to be dramatized, or they do completely realistic, only what we've done. So it's like if they like the actual realistic space program movies have been like actual history of the space program type stuff, good stuff like the Apollo 13 movie. But that's like, yeah, that's in the past. Is there some phone doing something? That's in the past. So that's sort of doesn't help us like inspire us for the future. Really, it's just like depressing, because so we've stopped doing those interesting things.
Yeah.
Or it's aliens who gives us the technology, like Stargate, that it's not actually our invention, but it's some version of either ancient aliens thing that it's always been here because aliens have been here in the past, and you find the ancient wonderful alien device, and then you can fly across the universe. Or like in, I guess, Babylon 5, is that like there are neighbors and they already have their like system of travel set up, and they just discover us and add us into their network type stuff. So we don't, in like Babylon 5, it was warp gates type stuff. So you don't, hyperspace gates, I guess. So you don't even have to have like advanced spaceships, because you can take sublight whatever spaceship and fly through the gateway to wherever. So in that, it was sort of interesting to like, you could have like many different, completely differently advanced empires using the same network of travel with like completely differently advanced ships. So it was kind of interesting.
Right.
But again, it was just skipping over, like in the universe of Babylon 5, we like what we did, or in like Battlestar Galactica, I guess, like it sort of implied that we did a little bit. It's like wasn't like great advanced technology or whatever, but still it focused on a moment in time, like outside of, or somewhere sometime else than when we actually invented something important. I think the only one of the Star Trek movies did like the period of time when the warp, like meeting the inventor of the warp drive and seeing the first
Yeah.
flight type thing. But that was like an isolated event, and they sort of again didn't show the actual development of the Federation or whatever Starfleet. And then where was it?
The,
Uh,
the,
the Expanse is,
the
I
exa-
guess, the closest.
I
But
I
like
was gonna bring that up.
the Expanse, like this of the whole Epstein drive, or what it's called, I think it's called that, the fusion drive type stuff, and gets into it a little bit. And that's like the only show. So like the Expanse is the only show, and they very quickly get to, and we found an alien protomolecule again, sort of ruining it immediately from the standpoint of like, couldn't
Yeah.
we have had like a little bit more of like, it's just actually just us improving type stuff? Because I've basically never seen us, like with the exception of showing Zephyr Cochrane in that Star Trek movie, like developing warp drive. I've like never seen like that in like a science fiction depicted as like or like a sci-fi show being about, this is how we're actually developing our faster than light. I think the only sort of way of this being done was a horror movie, like Event Horizon, where it was like, ooh, we've developed it, and it launched us into hell
Yeah.
immediately type
Well,
thing. It's just like, we shouldn't be dabbling type message. Even though there's a funny thing, some people are now trying to put the Event Horizon into the larger Warhammer 40k universe, because there's this whole like crazy warp hellish thing, travel in space, and they would just say that Event Horizon was a movie about one of the initial failed doomed attempts to try to navigate warp. So that's kind of funny. But again, that's just like a thing that I would very much like to see
hmm,
shown visually in like a computer game or a TV show or a movie. There's that period of time where we're actually pioneering and developing from where we're right now ish to either actually developing some faster than light stuff ourselves, or doing some major sublight
well,
expansion or construction.
here's the main problem with that, and I think the reason it hasn't been done successfully is, and we're seeing it a little bit. For All Mankind could potentially pull it off, probably for the first time
Good,
ever.
they could do it,
It could.
yes.
But here's the problem: is as soon as you got faster than light technology of any kind, and you're no longer tethered to our world per se, you can go create other worlds. Then you're not necessarily aligned to us at all. And then you could get, like, say, one faction that decides Earth is a problem for us to propagate the universe because Earth is holding us back. That guy could just send a sublight rocket or meteor into Earth and explode Earth in a second, essentially. And I can't see how we would ever stop that. So basically, we require an alien or external presence of some kind to unite us, to keep us, together, and in some way kind of keep us from destroying ourselves, I guess. So that's kind of one of those great filter concepts where as soon as you get faster than light travel, you've essentially, it just takes one guy to push one button that's had a bad day, had his wife dump him, and all of a sudden he's running a faster than light spaceship into the planet and exploding it, causing a black hole or something.
Yeah,
Um,
that's indeed the challenge that I would like
right.
to someone to try to imagine another way than like Aliens United us or Aliens forbid us from doing
Yeah.
this, that like would actually stop us or help us. Even though, like, I have full disclosure, I'm not entirely convinced that there aren't any aliens who would interfere or are interfering. It's possible that they are, and actually that's how it's going to go if you're going to develop anything. But it's possible.
Yeah.
But I would still like to assume that there is also a way how we could just develop ourselves without completely annihilate, because we can do it. Like, I think what's optimistic is that like we already have nukes.
Hmm.
Like you can, or like a person who has a very bad day could actually start the destruction of the world, and it hasn't happened for a while, which is great. With
Yeah.
the FTL, I think it's a bit of a to take it a step back, more realistic. Like with hypersonic missiles, like maybe the problem is reaction time. That like what would be very important is for multiple different actors developing it at the same time,
Hmm.
who again would immediately be keeping each other in check, because it sort of doesn't matter how fast or advanced the technology is, almost, because there's always something within the same physics that if you can develop the thing, you can also develop a countermeasure of some sort. I
Yeah.
think the most extreme example already is like what it could be, like how much of a problem it could be. Kinda is the hypersonic missiles, because like within the known physics, just what it means is that you don't have a lot of time to mount a response of any sort. With the like faster than light technology, there's some chance you could even be doing like time travel shenanigans and stuff, and like fixing the problems after they happened.
Well,
Type stuff.
time travel is a whole can of worms, right? Again,
It is,
you get into
but
Loki
like
and all these other multiverse kind of concepts that are
sure,
pretty tricky.
but almost every solution for faster than light travel allows you to I forgot what the specific term is, but to create the kind of time curve that would bring you into the past also. So
Yeah.
it seems like it's a package deal.
Well, it at least slows time. I don't know if I would ever. I don't know.
No, no,
It
like
might be package
specifically,
deal.
like it's
Yeah.
called. I think it's called something like closed.
Hmm.
So some sort of time curves, like specific kind of time curve that brings you on a trajectory into the past, and that's
Okay.
pretty much necessarily made possible if you can do like any sort of travel faster than light, because one of the things that the speed of light does is sort of like maintains like normal causality.
Hmm.
The type thing is like, it's like one of the big deals, like it's sort of preventing like the sort of time, the speed limit of the speed of light is sort of preventing everything from happening all at once, that type thing. So if you can circumvent that, then it should allow you to sort of that, because you can time travel into the future. You can create like slowing down of time, speeding up of time, relatively speaking. That's all within relativity. The
Yeah.
only issue is going back, and
Right.
nobody's really sure if you could do that, how exactly it would work anyway, because
Right.
there's a chance that every time you try to do it, the universe would somehow conspire to make it not work. As
Yeah.
I think it's Hawking's idea. So who knows? Who knows? But it's a good chance that it's a package deal. That if you can travel faster than light, you could do some sort of return in
Yeah.
time.
Well, and I think that's what leads me as a scientist and logician to believe that whatever Big Bang caused our universe, whatever God or entity or whatever caused that Big Bang, or whether we're all just in a simulation or whatever it might be, I have to kind of believe that if time travel was ever possible and it was allowed to kind of come into our game, whatever our game is, then wouldn't have it already happened? And at what point would we allow future people to come back and give us technology or things like that? And I feel like it messes with the rules of the game. Whatever grand deity created our world, or child in a computer simulation created our universe, they would basically specifically not allow something like time travel, or maybe even faster than light travel. Maybe it's not possible, because as soon as you do, the game breaks and the world breaks, the universe explodes. Perhaps it's what do you call it, the paradox, the whole Back to the Future paradox that basically makes the world explode.
Could be, but there's also maybe a possible way that we can't figure out yet how it all can work out. I think like one of those things is it kind of depends on like, okay, if you've changed the timeline, if the solution is actually that you've created the new timeline, you created a
Yeah.
new branch of the
Well, you get in
multiverse,
multiverses.
then it's not then it's not a problem really, because all of those timelines are about equally stable. It's just like sort of navigating your way through possible universes is basically
Yeah.
what you're doing, and that's why it's kind of a travel. Like it's
Mm,
actually like you could maybe think of it more as traveling to some other place rather
interesting.
than changing anything. I think is one of the sort of preferred interpretations. But also you could have like, as soon as somebody develops it first, they just make sure that they can thwart everybody else who would try to develop it later, type
Yeah.
thing. And then whatever the first one to develop it wants, it probably involves the universe not breaking. So they maybe just could be some sort of time variance authority
Yeah.
type people
Right.
the whole time
I,
from the first invention of the device.
yeah, I'll always keep an open mind. I'll never say it's not possible, but from my perspective today, and saving the world today and trying to make the world a better place, I like to just not worry about those concepts that we can't understand. If we can't wrap our mind around it, let's put it aside. It's a fun thing, but let's not focus on it too much. But what I do see as the future for all mankind, definitely see like space civilizations, perhaps some kind of not Dyson sphere, but maybe some kind of cylinder that functions,
I think
similar to their space
Swarm.
station.
I think Dyson Swarm is the preferred solution.
Yeah.
It's not one structure, but a bunch of structures that are not connected, all orbiting the object.
Yeah. So if mankind's not multiplanetary, at least we can create, super large space stations with 1 million people each and kind of
Sure.
send them off into the galaxy. And if we
I
kill
think
one, hopefully, at least some remnant of humanity will live on.
that's the thing. I very much like watching Isaac Arthur and his YouTube channel, and he also uses some of my music, especially, which is kind of amusing to me. The one thing he picked is he uses my music for intro and outro to the Alien series. So it's like I think 30 or something videos. It's always something like crazy aliens, or like what if aliens were something, and then try to speculate scientifically what implications it would have, which is usually great for science fiction authors who are watching his show a lot, to just sort of have some sort of questions scientifically answered for them for some what if scenarios. So it could be like, I think one of the latest ones were like colonizing the galaxy. Like, what if you were limited to only a small fraction of the speed of light? How it would affect your attempt at colonizing the galaxy in terms of like quantifiable, measurable things. So I think partially the problem is of imagination, because even within just the physics that we have, that's sort of main Arthur's argument, is that within just the physics we have, like just if you're thinking just engineering problems, not even like physics problems, you could definitely do mega structures in space. You could already start doing the Dyson swarm, like nothing's stopping you, unless there are some sort of secret hidden aliens who don't want you to. Like nothing's stopping you from doing a Dyson swarm, or even like mining all of Mercury to make it. It's like, because who cares? Like, who's gonna stop you? Astrologers? It's not forbidden. Like if you just wanted to, you could start doing it, just a long-term project. But also, there's so different stuff that you can decide to do even without just the known physics, that I think sort of the imagination of like sci-fi writers beyond certain point breaks down. And that's why I think like a big reason why they like to write close to now, or like in the past, or they want to write after some sort of like more decadent phase of the civilization when all of these sort of things were sorted out. Because the transformation period between now and later in the sci-fi, if we were to do it all ourselves, is just like so much different stuff could be done or could happen. Like with the habitats in space, you could totally construct so-called O'Neill cylinders. The closest depiction of that in science fiction is Babylon 5, The Station. Is actually pretty close to an O'Neill cylinder. And that's a completely, even with our materials right now, wouldn't even, because that's just our materials that we have is just limitation of size, like how big you could build it before it sort of tears itself apart by the centripetal force by which it generates gravity type stuff. So you could start building them. You could like mine whole planets and build like trillions of those, then fill those with like people and stuff. Yeah, it would take some sort of figuring out. Like I've recently seen, I think it's called Spaceship Earth. It's a documentary about the people who did the biosphere experiment. So you would need to do some figuring out of like actually being able to run a biosphere inside a self-contained system. And there's some engineering challenges. So, okay, if you really decided to do it now, maybe it would take you 50 years before you started to be actually able to produce it. But you can. And it's really more a question of like politics, or like sort of some sort of spiritual development of human race than it is any technology problem.
That's the key question with all of this. And again, that's to try to wrap up the discussion on For All Mankind for today. I think that's the key question: is we can do all these things. We could have had this, but will we? It's not necessarily a given that we continue to explore space. It's not necessarily a given that we become a multi-planetary species of any kind. We may hit some kind of catastrophic event before that sends us back to the Stone Age. We may have World War III. We may just decide that it's not worth the effort, that we're happy on Earth, and we have some kind of technological singularity here that keeps us from caring about going out into space, because we all have our virtual pods here on Earth and throw our brains up on some infinite, eternal, immortal being, or upload ourselves somehow where we no longer care.
I've just seen a good, interesting video. I don't remember who it was, on Lex Fridman podcast, one of the more recent ones. There was one scientist who was trying to explain his completely different approach to physics. Like, what if you assumed that consciousness is fundamental and not particles? You sort of rejected reductionism, that you can, like, from particles build up a brain and from brain generate a consciousness. But if you just decided that consciousness is fundamental and started from that
Mhm.
consciousness generates space-time and particles within it as its own constructs, basically. So sort of turning it up on its head type stuff. So he sort of said that maybe if that's the case, if you sort of discover that that's more fundamental way to look at physics, which in his mind is entirely possible, then maybe what you decide that exploring consciousness is way more interesting and important than exploring space-time if you sort of discover that space-time is in some way a projection
Hmm.
or a manifestation of consciousness, and that you would have more the case like because sort of the in-between metaphor is the simulation that you would sort of immerse yourself in VR. This is sort of in-between thing. This is sort of I guess that's exactly in between just the like old school let's go into space materialism and the sort of what do you call it, the new age, it's all just consciousness and all spiritual type. It's like exactly at the midpoint of like yeah, like you focus inwards on like the content of the psychology, but just you generating it completely materialistically and sort of creating a materialistic objectivized thing. So maybe like you could have civilizations that are sort of stuck in VR. You could have we could be that civilization for sure. But also if they just get a little bit more advanced, maybe they just like start doing like spiritual, like develop better drugs to alter their consciousness more to travel interdimensionally. Maybe they decide that that's the interesting stuff and they look at like space programs as like bit quaint. Like they still need to like have them and do something in space to technically protect themselves from maybe some threat from space because that's like you have to take care of your body like it can get ill or injured and stuff even if you're just focus on consciousness and you understand that your body is manifestation of your consciousness, you still need to take care of it because you still kind of need it to remain as the agent
Yeah.
that you are and so on and so forth. So you could have maybe have a lot of civilizations in space who are very advanced, but sort of just stayed within their solar system and sort of like did whatever they pimped out their solar system or like did whatever they wanted to, but probably largely decided that they don't want to do mega structures because they would be like hideous just like perversions of nature. Maybe they just like the natural system as it is, and maybe just do nice stuff on the main planet type stuff, or maybe like some bases on like the various bodies to study the nature of them, and that's what they like. And maybe then like just develop a way how to, because that's one of the things the scientist said was if space-time isn't fundamental and it is on some level a construct of something deeper like consciousness field or something, then maybe if you understand that, then you can just skip it.
Yeah.
Then it's just like it's not a thing that you have to traverse because you've like understood that the actual way to get from A to B is that realizing there is no space time between you.
Right.
And so like sort of that's entirely possible, and that could take us like could take a civilization from our point maybe just like 100 years to get that point to figure out that level of physics out, and then that's why nobody goes anywhere.
Absolutely. And I think that's the key point that I want to really hit home to everybody who's watching this today is that what really matters is that we are able to continue to imagine, continue to explore whatever parts of the universe you want to explore, whether it's internal or external. And saving the world is the most important part to allow us as a species to continue to imagine. So think about that. Think about what we need to do today to ensure that our kids and ourselves and our future society continues to enjoy things like For All Mankind, stories that help us imagine what it could be and what we need to do to actually keep our world moving forward and not fall back into some kind of Armageddon-esque, post-apocalyptic or even completely exterminated society. Those are the fears. Those are the real dangers that we each need to think about. And shows like this help me kind of imagine what could be and how we
No,
can work towards it.
it's definitely an interesting window into like what you could be doing, and maybe like to help you decide, is this the kind of thing that we want to do? Because I think like still the best argument isn't like maybe we need to fly to Mars to look at the rocks. And it's just like there's not much that actually captures the imagination. That's why I think it would be actually in general like sort of embracing the search for intelligent alien life maybe would be like a better direction for space agencies instead of like laughing at it, because that actually captures the imagination. And it's quite clear that it is possible to find it. Just you would have to do a little bit of different missions. Like you wouldn't do maybe strictly speaking, a mission. We need to land people on Mars to like walk around the Mars. That's maybe then not the priority. Maybe you do the thing like they want to send some sort of Russian, I think, billionaire wants to send the probes that are like very small, very light probes that would be accelerated with laser, but even within our lifetime would still get to like the nearest solar system and take pictures and send them back, that type of thing. Maybe that's the better mission in like that sort of estimation. Or maybe you want to decide that like it's about more like looking inwardly, but even then I still think you have to conclude that you still need to do something, like have a presence in space. Like I think the main arguments that NASA makes, that or some of the corporations make that do make sense, are like life is fragile, you want to build some fail safes, and maybe not so much that like we need to escape, have a place to escape to, but like if we have some presence in space, then we maybe can prevent some dangers to the planet.
Well, that's the biggest thing for me, is it's the space race. If you can survive in space, you can use that same technology to better the world and survive better on the world. And I think that's where it pushes the envelope. It pushes our fusion, it pushes our technology in so many different directions by working all together on this great, almost unachievable task, and actually achieving it can prove that we can achieve so much more here on Earth working together as well. And I think it's the connection of working together for that particular race that brings all the parties together, the private sector, the public sector, the US, the Russia, all the different sociological ideologies can kind of be united along progressing humanity. And that's what I like about the space race and all of this imaginative stuff, series types things that really get you deep into thinking what could be and how do we work together to make it happen, to make it better, and to not fall back at least. So that was really good. Thanks so much for joining us today. Any final comments that you want to throw out there, Martin, as far as For All Mankind, or what we can take away from it?
I think the main conclusion is that solar sails are really cool. I think the whole scene with the pirate shanty when they were like extending the sail, and that was brilliant.
Solar sails are awesome. Absolutely. Love it. All right. Thanks everybody for joining us. Join us again next time. We'll dig deeper into some other great series, or continue to dig deeper into all these different ideas. And feel free to reach out to us. Join us anytime if you want to be part of this effort to save the world together. And that's Luke Macmichael and Martin Rezny signing off for today. Thanks so much.